Welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation Pod, everybody. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and this week on, y'all, part of my team, Connor Diaz. He's the outreach and content lead for the app CivWiz. And of course, like I said, he's on my team at the Office of Social Innovation. How are we doing today?
Not bad. Stoked to be here, Ian.
Anyways, guys, on today's pod, we're going to go through Connor's life story, how he got to where he's at here at Pitt now, what he's doing with CivWiz, the future of CivWiz, and after our artist spotlight, we will get into a conversation about segregation in schools. But anyways, formalities out of the way, let's get straight to it. Tell me about your backstory, Connor.
Yeah, sure. So I guess starting from the very beginning, I was born in Orange County, Southern California, in 2003. Lived there for about 3 years, and then moved out to Central Virginia, just south of Richmond, when I was 2006, for my parents' work stuff. Got there, went to preschool for a few years, then went to Catholic school for kindergarten through ninth grade, which was a time. We could unpack that too. But, shortly after we moved to Virginia, both my parents lost their jobs from the recession in 2008. And stuff got tough for a little bit. But, my parents are great. I benefit from being an only child, so I got plenty of attention from them. And I never noticed things being too bad until after the fact.
Did you get lonely?
A little bit, yeah. Especially because where I went to school was about, it was a private school. So it's about half an hour away from my house. And we didn't live in like the super swanky suburbs of Richmond. We lived in like the, normal middle class, lower middle class suburbs of Richmond. So my friends were all 20 plus miles away. What friends I had, right, in middle school. So it wasn't like, I get home from school and I can go play with the neighborhood kids, like play basketball, whatever. I'd come home and then I'm just kind of by myself. And my parents both worked full time. So, between 3 and 5, I was kind of just having to make do with what I had. So played a lot of video games. That said, I definitely didn't mind being an only child. Do you have siblings, Ian?
I do.
Yeah.
I have an older brother and a younger sister. So it's like, and we're all 4 years apart.
Oh, wow.
It's like the social dynamic's pretty good. There's always someone to hang around in the house.
Yeah.
So I can't like fully relate with that.
Yeah. I do remember, I think I was like 8 or 9 and my parents were like kind of half joking about having another kid. And I was like, no, absolutely not. Because I just did, like, I would see my friends who had siblings, like, for some reason, this was like the sticking point for me. They had to share a room with their sibling. And the idea of that just like made me melt down. I think it's probably why I sprung for a single my freshman year of college, because I just did not want to share a room with anybody.
No, I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel like sharing a room with a sibling and then growing out of that, it's just like, it's like a rite of passage.
Yeah. I eventually had a roommate last year, so I think I got a little taste of
Your
that.
first sibling?
My first sibling, yeah. It was also like my best friend from high school, so it wasn't too bad. But yeah, so went to Catholic school, K through 8, a majority white Catholic school. I think I was one of maybe 5 non-white people there. Wow. I'm trying to like count in my head. I think there was 2 in my year, in a class of about 80. So that was probably pretty formative, growing up around not just majority white folks, but also, upper class white folks, because it was a private school, a Catholic school. Went to church every day in middle school, 8 a.m. mass, which was pretty crazy. But then kind of after middle school, for as far as your options go for Catholic school in Richmond, it becomes gendered after middle school. So you either go to the women's school or the young men's school. The women's school is just like a continuation of traditional Catholic school, but the men's high school was I think almost $20,000 a year, which is crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
That's literally like college tuition.
Yeah, that's not even this is a bit of an aside, but that's not even the most expensive private school in the area. There was another one that I think for high school was pushing 40, which was crazy. And I knew people who went there, and it was just like people with siblings, like 3 or 4 siblings, all went through it.
I mean, I get it though, because a lot of the times with those schools, you're paying so much money for the high school experience, you get a college scholarship.
Yeah, that's true in a lot of their cases. A lot of them did get pretty good scholarships, but some of them didn't. And that was just crazy to me. 40 grand a year for high school. And I remember looking, and I'm sure we can talk about this later when we get into the school segregation stuff. But like even very early education at those schools, like I'm talking pre-K, kindergarten, is like pushing 15 to 20 a year. It's great for kindergarten. I like playing with blocks. But anyway, so not only was the men's Catholic high school super expensive, but it was also a military prep school, which
That's a combo.
it is a bit of a crazy combo. And it was taught by monks on like they called the campus the Abbey. It was like this kind of like secluded campus. I'm sure anyone from Richmond probably knows exactly what school I'm talking about. Kind of a lot of mystique around it. Not appealing to me because I was pretty disillusioned from Catholic life, I guess, after 9 years of it, kind of occupying a very prominent place in the foreground of my life. And I also had no interest in joining the military. So started looking at other options. I'm fortunate enough to be from a town that has, they call them specialty centers. They're public schools. Are you from Pittsburgh, Ian?
I'm not from Pittsburgh.
Where are you from?
So I'm from Lansdale, Pennsylvania. It's like 30 minutes outside Philly.
Do y'all have like public schools that like for high schools that have a specialty focus that you have to apply to?
Yeah, like tech schools.
Yeah, exactly. Same kind of thing. So we had that. There's a whole bunch of them. There was like there was a tech one. There was a leadership one. Struggling to remember. And then we also had like the IB programs and stuff. But we also have this thing in Virginia. I think Virginia and maybe Ohio are the only states that have these called governor schools that are like state-funded schools. They're public, but they are like magnet schools also. And how the ones in Virginia work was they draw from X number of counties. Ours drew from 12 counties, and each county gets as many seats as they can pay for. So it's the counties that pay for the school. And you have to apply. There's an entrance exam very similar to the SAT or LSAT, which was kind of crazy for a 13-year-old to be doing. But I had a really great teacher in middle school who encouraged me to apply there, and I did. So I ended up getting in there and going there to Maggie Walker Governor School, named for the first Black female banker. Great woman. She's got a good statue down on Broad Street in Richmond now. Definitely recommend seeing it. So yeah, that's where I ended up for high school. The kind of makeup of Maggie Walker was very, very different from where I went to elementary and middle school, because it drew from not just the suburbs. It also drew from the city and then like the rural counties out in the middle of the sticks. It's an interesting makeup. I think it was about 40% white, large Asian and South Asian representation, and then Black and Hispanic students kind of occupied the last little bit. So it was interesting. As someone who is like a little bit, and I will say that unlike many experiences that I've heard about, there wasn't much kind of, I don't know how you want to say it, kind of self-imposed racial segregation at my school. Like the lines were pretty fluid, which I really appreciated after having been at a school where that very much wasn't the case. That said, as someone who's, I guess, racially ambiguous, you could say, it was weird not knowing quite where I fit into that dynamic. I was lucky enough by like the end of sophomore year to stumble into a great group of friends, many of whom I still talk to today. In high school, I did not a whole lot actually, but one of the big things I did was tech theater.
Tech theater?
Yeah. You didn't expect that?
I don't even know what that is.
So it's like the side of theater performance that has nothing to do with acting or singing. So We did like the lighting and the sound design. I didn't do any stage design or anything like that, but it's stuff like that basically for people who wanted to be in the theater and involved. But
Was it like an elective or was it like an after school thing?
it was an after school thing. It was really involved though. Like during show weeks or tech week is what they call the week before the show, when you're dry running everything, you're finalizing your lighting designs. We'd be there from like when school got out at 3 o'clock or whatever until like 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Sheesh.
Yeah,
that's like giving me marching band vibes.
it kind of was. We thought we were cooler than the marching band kids. Actually, we didn't have a marching band at my high school because we didn't have a football team. Yeah, because it was like a nerd school. They didn't want to put us in pads. We get killed. But yeah, no, it was fun, and it was like all student run. I don't know how they were allowed to let us do that. They would just kind of like let us hang out and do stuff. So that was fun. Not something I do anymore. I tried running one show here at Pitt, and like I thought the high school shows were involved, but a college level musical production is like a beast, and I just don't have the. I'm too old now. Yeah,
Please, out the game, he's washed.
Yeah, I don't have the bandwidth for that anymore. So yes, I did that in high school. In high school, my kind of academic interest shifted. In middle school, I really had no interest in the humanities at all. Partly as a product of some pretty terrible teachers. I don't want to name names, but I was very put off by history, civics. What do they call English and language arts?
Mm-hmm.
Just because my teachers weren't great. In high school, that changed. My freshman year global history teacher was like, I could say her name, Dr. Anderson. She was great. Totally shifted my perspective on history, and that kind of set off a chain reaction in shifting my interest entirely from STEM toward the humanities. So I kind of steeped myself in that. Because I was privileged enough to go to a school like Maggie Walker, which had the resources of 12 counties pouring into it. We had all kinds of AP classes. So I got to take a lot of AP history classes. And then we also had a dual enrollment with VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, which is a big four-year university just down the street from Maggie Walker. So I got to take some dual enrollment classes with them, fell in love with history. And then a lot of my friends were also interested in history, so kind of just fed into it. So when it came time to start looking at colleges, I was looking for schools with great history programs, and Pitt has a wonderful one. That said, from being out of state, Pitt is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So it initially wasn't even on my radar until my good friend Donovan, who I went to high school with, and went to Pitt a year ahead of me, sent me like an admission fee waiver. So I didn't have to pay the $70 or whatever it was to apply. So I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll do it.
Funny story. Admission fees almost like completely derailed my college.
Yeah, I bet.
My parents, they have good money now. They didn't always. So I had like a frugal mindset, like growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to applying for colleges, all these admission fees, like between like $30 and like $100,
it's crazy.
I actually stopped applying to schools solely because of the admission fee. My mom wanted to beat my ass.
Yeah, I bet.
She got so mad at me, and I finally chose to apply to Pitt.
Yeah,
and this was like after like the deadline. It was like the rolling admission. I still somehow got it.
How many schools did you apply for before you stopped?
Before I stopped, like 5.
Yeah, I think I applied to 6 total for the same reason. It's just like it's $75 for a crapshoot of getting in.
Literally.
That's why I didn't apply to like, I went to school with a bunch of geeks. Like they were applying. I had friends who applied to all of the Ivy League schools, and then a few others. I only applied to one. I didn't get in. But it was like those especially. I was like, I really can't justify spending money on this because it's like even if my numbers are there, even if my extracurriculars are there, it's still like you're rolling the dice. There's just only so many seats. So I can definitely relate to kind of limiting how many applications you send out. And it's funny to hear that Pitt was also kind of a late addition for you. Yeah. So because I would not have applied if not for that application waiver. And I'm glad I did. So I applied. College admissions was that whole thing. And then got my offers. I got a really good offer from Pitt. So I took that. I'm very grateful for, the money they've offered me because else I would not have been able to attend. And I'm very glad to be here. But yeah, so I guess that's my life story up to Pitt. If you have like any particular questions or things you want to probe into, I'd be happy to answer.
So what do you study here at Pitt?
Oh yeah, sure. I came in as a history major. I'm still a history major. I'm actually wrapping it up right now. My concentration is in it's a long-winded thing, but it's basically in American Indian history between 1800 and the Civil War. That's my concentration there. And then halfway through freshman year, I realized that I might want to get a job after school, so I added a legal studies major, which is now called Law, Criminal Justice, and Society, which is probably the most verbosely named major on campus. It sounds like 3 majors. It's just one. So that's my second major. My focus there is in civil rights law and criminal procedure.
So what do you want to do with those majors?
Tough question. I was actually just talking to my advisor about that this morning. So plan A right now is to go to law school and eventually practice civil rights law. But do you know anyone in law school right now?
Not currently.
I didn't when I decided I want to go to law school, and then as part of that process, I met some people in law school, and
it is not easy.
No, every conversation I have with them makes me want to go to law school less. But that's still plan A. I'm still studying for the LSAT, which also sucks. But that's plan A. Plan B would be doing something with a history degree. Like I said, I had some really great teachers in high school who impacted me greatly. And I think that as a result, I have somewhat of an obligation to kind of pay that forward. So something I've considered is getting my undergraduate degree, and then either pursuing a master's in history or education and getting my teaching certs in teaching high school. I think teaching high school history would be fun. Again, though, every high school history teacher I've taught or talked to has told me not to do it. Like my girlfriend's dad he's a middle school civics teacher. He's been teaching there for like 20 years. And like the first time I met him, he asked me like what I wanted to do after school. And I told him, and he was like, no, that's dumb. Don't do it. So both plan A and B have people telling me not to do them. Plan C is to pursue a PhD in history and hopefully land a job as a teaching professor somewhere. Again, most of the history professors I've talked to now are like, no, don't do that. Because history professors professors in general these days are just not retiring anymore. So the jobs are few and far between, especially in the humanities, where jobs are so sparse that once you've got one, you're not giving it up, you know? So yeah, those are my degrees and what I want to do with them.
I mean, I understand why the people in it are saying don't do it because, job scarcity, potential pay issues. But you're also talking about how it just takes one teacher to just like completely reshape and restructure the trajectory of your life.
True.
You could be that teacher in someone else's life.
And the prospect of that is very motivating. Like, I would absolutely love to do that. I'd love to go back and teach at my high school. I think that'd be awesome. So many of my teachers at Maggie Walker went through Maggie Walker as students and then came back. So I think it'd be cool. I love Richmond as a city. Have you been down to Richmond before?
I've not been to Richmond.
Would definitely recommend it. Not during the summer. It's
too hot.
Terrible. But great town, great history. Some pretty terrible history too.
Yep.
Yeah. That whole being the capital of the Confederacy thing.
That little thing we just
yeah. But great town. I'd love to go back and live there and work there. And to your point, I think that the value of just one teacher on one student can't be overstated.
Now, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I usually ask this later, but I just feel really pressed to ask this now. What role does religion currently play in your life? How has that changed from when you were younger?
It's a tough question. So my parents are, I hope they don't listen to this, what we call C&E Catholics, which stands for Christmas and Easter Catholics, meaning they go to church on Christmas and Easter. My grandparents on my dad's side, my white side, are very Catholic. Like, even to this day, they're going to mass every day. And my grandparents on my mom's side, Filipino, all the way through. Well, maybe not quite according to that DNA test I took. Yeah. Were also very Catholic before they passed. So a lot of Catholic around me. And then my grandparents are the ones who paid for me to go to Catholic school because they wanted me to be Catholic. I went through the sacraments. I got baptized, took my first communion, first confession, stuff like that. But Catholic school, in my experience and in the experience of many people I've talked to, is not a good medium for creating new Catholics, or even keeping Catholics Catholic, because the way that religion became kind of a rudimentary part of my daily academic life made it less appealing to me, if that makes sense, right?
No, it
Like
does.
it became a class. Like we had a religion class, so
It's a chore.
it became a chore. We had homework, we had tests. Like that's just not a way that I think is conducive to. It's not a good way to engage with religion. That's not what it's supposed to be, right? And then obviously the Catholic Church has problems as an establishment that we never had, to my knowledge, no problems at my school. I think that the clerical officials, the priests and stuff, they were good. I never had any bad experiences. Never had anyone who did. But as an establishment, the Catholic Church obviously has its problems. So I think those two things combined kind of pushed me away from Catholicism practice. And then I don't know how familiar you are with the Catholic sacraments, but
Not fully.
so there's 7. The big ones are going to be baptism, first communion, and then confirmation. And confirmation you're meant to do when you're like 15 or 16, and you basically go in. You have to take classes and stuff, and then there's a special mass. And at that mass, you basically say, "Yes, I'm all in as a Catholic." Right? You are confirming. I never did that just because I left Catholic school before that would be part of my education. And then my excuse to my parents was always just, "Oh, I'm too busy to take the classes." But yeah, I just never became like an anti-theist, I guess. Like I was never like religion is dumb. Obviously, never going to be like that. I just kind of fell out of practice with the Catholic Church. So religion took a step back in my life for solid 3 years, 4 years in high school, maybe even longer, up until maybe last year. And then my grandmother passed last February on my mom's side. And Filipinos have a lot of kind of unique customs when someone dies. And one of them is you hold vigil for 10 days after their death. And during that vigil, you pray the rosary. So for 10 days, I was getting on a Zoom call with family members I haven't seen in years and praying the rosary together. And that like impacted me in a way that I did not expect. I'd prayed the rosary a billion times in Catholic school. But doing it in that way, I kind of realized like, oh, this is what engaging with religion is supposed to be like, where it serves a spiritual purpose, not an academic or procedural one. So I didn't start practicing again. I went to mass a few times with my roommate Donovan because he's practicing. Good influence on me. But I definitely became more open to the idea of religion and spirituality. Not that I was ever against it. I think I just kind of closed my mind to it. Much more open now. But I haven't been practicing any more than I did when I was kind of close to it. My perception of it has changed a lot. And I also happen to have a lot of friends who are religious, which wasn't the case in high school. So that definitely helps too, because when you step away from an establishment like the Catholic Church, your conception of religion becomes very inhuman. So it helps to like know people like my buddy Jackson, who's a practicing he's practicing Orthodox, and I can talk to him about religion. It becomes human. So yeah, I guess that's my engagement with religion. It's a good question.
I definitely feel you on that because I feel as though you can't really stick to a religion unless you really make it your own.
Yes.
You can't have someone tell you all these things you need to do, but you have to go on that journey yourself.
Yeah, and unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, Catholicism is a very centralized religion. Obviously, like, there is a guy whose job it is to tell you how to practice Catholicism.
Mhm.
There's the Pope. Uh, so it's hard to make it your own. But I think maybe seeing the ways that um, specific Catholic cultures do make it their own, like whether it's through the Rosary vigils in the Philippines or any other number of local Catholic traditions. Seeing the way people do make it their own was compelling.
So pivoting and moving forward,
Mhm.
CivWiz
Mhm.
here at Pitt, how did that come to be?
Sure. So, spring semester freshman year, I got an email from my then honors advisor, Dave Frazier, who's great. I actually ran into him yesterday. Shout out Dave if he's listening. Just got an email. He was passing along an offer letter that the ODEI had sent out saying, "Hey, we're looking to create this app. We need I can't remember what they were calling the position at that time. Something data research fellows. We need data research fellows to help write quiz questions for this app." And Dave's like, "Oh, you might be a good fit for this." So I applied and got in. This was spring 2022, I believe. At that point, there were 3 data research fellows writing questions and 3 game narrative fellows who were checking the questions and kind of helping put the app together. I'm not really sure what they were doing, to be honest. So I was on that for that spring semester and then the summer of 2022. And then kind of fizzled out over the spring, partly because I think CivWiz was making the transition from ODEI to the Center for Race and Social Problems, and just administration is tough to make a cross department switch.
Yeah.
So it went dormant for a little while, and then in spring of like very early, like January, February of spring last year, I emailed Ron, who I believe has been on the pod, and I was like, "Hey, what's up with CivWiz? Can I help?" And he got back to me and was like, "Yeah, we've been working on getting it shifted over to this new department. We want to get it started again. Can you join Advite, who they'd already brought on as the product manager, and kind of serve as the everything else manager?" It was initially proposed to me as, "Can you drive grant development?" So basically writing grant applications to help get us more funding. So yeah, sure, I can do that. And then it just kept evolving, and then eventually they let me bring on a team of 5 other fellows who are great. Love them. Many of them are still working with us today. And then over time, I just kind of took on more and more responsibility until I kind of stepped into the role I'm in now as outreach and engagement lead, outreach and content lead, where I do pretty much everything but the technical side of the app. Our product manager handles that stuff because Lord knows I couldn't. I don't know how to code an app for the life of me. So at CivWiz, I still lead grant development, foundation engagement. I help design the narrative of the app, shape its curriculum. I check the questions that the fellows write. Sorry, they're called R&D assistants now. That the assistants write. I manage the team. I help coordinate social media efforts. Kind of a jack of all trades there.
So for anybody who doesn't know, what would you tell them what CivWiz is?
Yeah, that's tough. That's we've been doing a lot of. It shouldn't be tough. I just mean to say that over the last few weeks, we've been doing a lot of outreach stuff, and that's a question we get quite a lot because the name is not self-explanatory. So
I actually disagree.
Really? That's good to hear.
I think that the name makes a lot of sense.
That's good to hear because we've gotten some feedback like, "Why is it called CivWiz?" And
I'm trying to become a whiz at civics.
Thank you. So you get it.
I'm not the one telling you are. So I'm gonna let you tell people what CivWiz is.
Ian gets it. Okay, so CivWiz, this is kind of the scripty, pitchy answer to that, but it is an innovative, multimodal trivia learning app designed to evaluate and cultivate civic and cultural competency across academic disciplines. So to translate that into normal words, it's a learning app that uses a few different kinds of quiz styles. We've got true and false, multiple choice, and word scramble to help make civic learning. So think, the basic definition of civics being the duties and rights of citizenship, but we take a wider definition, which I'd be happy to talk about. But to make civics learning accessible to anyone who wants it, anywhere they want it, whenever they want it. Because a problem we observed is that traditional mediums of civic learning, think like a government class at the collegiate level, have a lot of barriers inherent to them that make it hard for a large swath of students to engage with them. So people outside of the university system, or even some people inside of it, are prohibited from partaking in that because of a cost barrier, right? Say you're already taking a full schedule. If you wanted to engage with that, you'd have to pay extra.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not a student, you're paying a whole lot extra to get in that class. And then imagine you have room in your schedule. You're taking 15 credits. You can put an extra class on. Accessibility is an issue. The time requirement is an issue. And the fact that, to be quite frank, that kind of education isn't very highly valued in today's society means that people are discouraged from taking it. So we just observed that traditional civic learning mediums are not conducive to wide-scale engagement. And when we're dealing with civics, you need wide-scale engagement. I'd say it's more true in civics than any other kind of discipline. And the consequences of the lack of that kind of engagement are very easily observed. Ian, can you estimate what percentage of the population, of the American population, can name all three branches of government?
I'm going to say it's going to be like 20%.
You're not far off. It's about 30%. And guess what percentage can name at least one branch of government?
That has to be like 80%.
30%.
No, there's no way.
Yeah. A third of the population can name all three, and a third of the population can only name one. It's bonkers, right?
That is bonkers.
Yeah, that's like middle school level stuff, but it's true. And today's political climate is so polarized, and we always talk about how we need to come together and try to heal that polarization. But it's hard to imagine that happening when there is not a widely shared lexicon of basic civic knowledge that people can use to connect. And I think that's partly why we live in such a polarized society and why it's not getting any better, is because people, to no fault of their own, are lacking the kind of basic vocabulary they need to engage in civic dialogue. So CivWiz is the answer to that. It's free, available on iOS and Android. Anyone can download it. You just need an email to make an account. You can pick it up, play it for a few minutes, put it down. You engage with it how much you want to engage with it. That said, there are things that incentivize engagement. We're still working on kind of expanding these features. Right now, we've got a head-to-head feature, which I think is a fun way to encourage people to continue engaging with the app by competing with their friends. And there's also a leaderboard feature, so you can see where you stand relative to other players. Some things we've got in the works right now. We're working on developing some cosmetics for people to use that they can earn with in-game currency. We want to partner with student organizations and community-led organizations to figure out what kind of things they observe people in the community needing to know, so that we can integrate that with our curriculum. We want to develop a live resource feed within the app, so people can, draw from it information about how to contact their elected officials, register to vote. We want to have listings for local volunteer and civic engagement opportunities. So we want to make an app that is both a one-stop shop for civic engagement, but is also accessible. We don't want any barriers at all to anyone participating in. We want it to be as widely adopted as possible, I guess, is the ultimate aim.
Well, I guess you basically answered all my questions. I was going to ask you about, like, where are we at now? Where are we going in the future? That's all been laid out.
Yeah.
So I guess the last thing that we're going to hit before our artist spotlight is, what is your biggest piece of advice you can give to everybody watching?
Yeah. I've got two. Can I do two quickly?
Oh, yeah.
Word. Okay. So the first one is kind of a more personal piece of advice. Do you rock climb, Ian? You're a rock climber?
I do not rock climb.
So one of my favorite rock climbers of all time, Lynn Hill. Have you seen the movie Free Solo? Are you familiar with it?
I have not.
So it's a movie about this guy who climbs up this formation in Yosemite called El Capitan. It's like 3,000 feet high, I think.
Crazy.
He does it without a rope or anything. He's crazy.
It's crazy.
But a little bit to the left of the route he followed on El Capitan is this route called the Nose. It's on this called Narette, but it's the point of the formation. And for almost a century, no one thought you could climb it up. or climb up it without using what's called aid, like ladders, basically stuff that isn't your hands to pull yourself up the rock. No one thought it was possible. And in the late 80s, this young female climber named Lynn Hill came along, fresh off of like absolutely dominating the competition circuit in Europe, and just floated up it, just climbed up it. No ladders, no spikes, just fingers and toes to pull herself up this 3,000-foot mountain. And she was up there for a while, 2,000 feet, and the whole time people are kind of doubting her. Like, no one's ever done it before. People stronger than her have failed. People taller than her have failed. People with more experience have failed. But she did it. And then she came back a few years later and did it in under 24 hours, which is just unthinkable. But when asked, like, what does she have to say to all of the people who are doubting her, all she said was, "It goes, boys. Like, it's possible." So I guess I take from that the idea that you can't let others who have failed before you dissuade you from trying something. Is I guess the lesson to be gleaned there, which I guess you could apply to what I said about law school and grad school for history. And like, just because it hasn't worked out for other people doesn't mean it's not going to work out for you. Especially if you got enough drive. And then my second piece of advice is from Ron, again, who's been on the pod. Shout out Ron. Eternally shout out Ron. At an event he hosted a few weeks ago, the Reese film premiere. I think you were there, right? Yeah. He said something toward the end that just stuck with me and like spun my head around. And he said, he had just premiered this amazing film, and at the end he was like, "Listen, I'm glad everybody came out today, but this wasn't a fun get together, let's watch a movie and hang out and have food," right? He said, now that you understand the capacity that individual people have for affecting social change, you have a responsibility to figure out what exactly your role in doing that is and pursue it just like restlessly. So the idea that a single person can affect such great social change so long as they figure out how best they as a person can do it, articulate it, and pursue it, really, really impacted me. Because I think a lot of people struggle with that. But just seeing yourself kind of as a tool or a vessel with a particular set of skills, and then just sitting down and thinking, like, how best do these skills translate to making the world better, and then just pursuing that without rest, was another piece of advice that really impacted me.
Oh, I'm sure Ron will be very proud.
I hope so. I hope so.
Pod.
Yeah.
But anyways, y'all, getting into this week's artist spotlight, I'll be playing the song "Somewhere Tonight" by Fosh. I hope y'all enjoy. Hope y'all enjoyed that snippet from Fosh, "Somewhere Tonight." You'll find their artist pages in the description of this episode, wherever you're watching or listening. Now, getting into the second half of this week's episode, we're going to talk about school segregation. I leave the floor open to you, Connor.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce it back to you. I'm curious to hear what your experience in grade school was like with respect to this.
So, in terms of segregation, I'm definitely not a stranger to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually funny. I went to a Christian school for grade school,
mm-hmm.
and I was the only black kid, like literally in the entire school.
Wow.
Now, that school was a lot smaller. It was
mm-hmm.
only about 400 people when it was K through 12.
Mm-hmm.
So very small school. But moving from there,
Mm-hmm.
my school district, the Methacton School District,
Mm-hmm.
it is a very affluent area.
Mm-hmm.
My high school's demographics, it was 94% white.
Mm.
94% white in a high school that had a graduating class of about 500.
What, your high school was public?
Public,
Okay, yeah.
So I was one of, I think, 15 black kids in a
Wow.
school of like 1,300.
Yeah.
So like we were literally like drops in the bucket.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. Now, mind you, 3 minutes down the road
Mm-hmm.
was Norristown Area High School, which was 70% minority
Yeah.
and only 30% white. Now, the zoning, we can get into the zoning,
Yeah.
redlining,
Mm-hmm.
all those things that went together into it. But it is clear that those factors had a direct impact on school demographics.
For sure. Was there a stigma around the other school? Like, was it perceived by your peers as worse or dangerous or anything like that?
For sure. My school, it was just walk in, go to class, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In Norristown, they had metal detectors, they had multiple armed guards,
Mm-hmm.
all those things, which sort of just enforces that you are a lesser person.
Yes,
going to
it's
that
very
school.
dehumanizing. You feel like you're going through TSA to go to school.
Literally,
Yeah.
it's part of the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely.
The two experiences are just vastly different, even though you could just be separated by a block.
Yeah, it's crazy. And unfortunately, that's a very common story. I mentioned to Ian earlier that I'm in my capstone seminar for my history major. That's centered around Brown v. Board and its fallout. And a lot of people thought that school segregation would end with Brown v. Board. The NAACP chose schools as the arena to end segregation in because they thought that it would be A, the most effective, and B, the most impactful. That's a tough call to make. But even in schools, what are we, 60 years after Brown, 70 years after Brown, almost 70 now. Even schools themselves haven't been desegregated. They very much still are. And I think it's partly a product of schools, zoning, and all of the other factors that decide who goes where being wrapped up in just like a web of complicated issues. For me, I was kind of almost anticipating you mentioning another school down the road that was heavily minority, because, like you said, with how zoning lines are drawn, that's a very common story, and it's no accident. I was just watching a Frontline documentary about a town, I believe it was just outside of Baton Rouge. Can't remember what they renamed it to, but basically Baton Rouge was this one big parish, is what they call their counties or whatever down in Louisiana, and because of redlining, there was a geographical distinction between where the affluent white folks lived and where everybody else lived. That said, they were all in one school district, but the affluent white folks got together and had all these meetings, started complaining about why are we subsidizing these people's education? They're bringing the quality of the education for our kids down. And for about 10 years, they broke off from Baton Rouge, tried to create their own school districts that were, in their mind, the ones they were paying for. But, as a dog whistle, it just meant they were white, and left the minority kids to kind of fend for themselves in what was left in terms of resources. Because when they left the parish, they left with their resources too. So that's a long-winded way to say that the segregation that we see between schools is no accident. It is almost always the intentional result of either collective action by individuals or government action. And I think that people being unwilling to see that is part of why it hasn't gotten any better. And it's a story that is ubiquitous across the U.S. Up in here in PA, you saw it. I was reading an article yesterday about Westmount Airy. Are you familiar with Westmount Airy?
I'm not familiar.
It's a neighborhood / suburb of Philly that in the 60s, the community kind of came together and basically said, we are going to become the model for integration. And they made all these active efforts to bring Black families into the communities, integrate the schools. And for a while, it was great. But then people stopped contributing to it and it fell apart. And now the Henry School, I believe is what it's called in Westmount area, is 88% Black. And all the white kids go to private schools.
I know the Henry School.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other side of that is active efforts to combat segregation in schools help, but they are also contingent on them being continuous. It's a really complicated issue to unwrap. At your school, being at your high school, I guess, being one of the few Black kids there, did you find yourself like associating mainly with the Black kids, or was it more fluid? What was that like?
It was definitely more fluid because the thing was that, like I said, the difference between you being in Norristown or being in Methacton can be a difference of a block. A lot of these kids, it was the difference of a block, and they were just a block away from being in Norristown. So they were coming from less privileged backgrounds. They struggled more with the traditional schooling system. My best friend, Steven, me and him were the only two Black kids that were in the honors classes. So I only really had him to, congregate with,
relate
to as a Black person. Otherwise, all my friends were white.
Did you get flack for being bookish?
I did. I definitely did. I remember one thing that does stick with me. My high school was very, very, very racist. That's why I founded a Black student union there.
Yeah.
But one time I was asked why I don't sell drugs.
By
a white person, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was asked why I don't sell drugs. That was crazy. That was honestly very formative.
Yeah.
Because I sort of made it.
How old were you?
I was 14.
Wow. 14?
Mm-hmm. So I sort of made it my life goal to just stick it to him. I'm gonna do things in terms of community engagement.
Yeah.
I don't need to sell drugs.
14 is wild.
Yeah. Oh, they also asked me, why don't I talk Black?
Yeah, that's a very common question.
With assuming that Black people are a monolith.
Yeah.
It's very, very common thing.
Yeah. I heard people I went to high school with experience similar things. Mainly from other minority students. Just because I'm not sure why, actually.
I think that racism can be internalized.
Very much so.
It's just I don't know why it's such a common coping mechanism, honestly.
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask a psychologist, I think. But you're right that it is common. I was reading another article by a linguist, and the reason I asked about you getting flack was he noticed that it's very common in Black communities that have been marginalized and kind of disadvantaged very heavily by trends like redlining or blockbusting or stuff like that. People that have been shoved to the margins of society by government or individual action. It's very common in areas like those for young Black students who are high achieving in school to be accused of being race traitors or acting white. And I think it's another symptom of, like you said, internalized racism, which is unfortunate. And that's just another factor that is wrapped up in the segregated school issue. It's incredibly hard to untangle. And I'm not sure anyone has the answer for it, which is a little disheartening.
It is.
Yeah.
So I'd say there's two different types of segregation. We obviously have segregation by school, which is the difference between Norristown and Methacton. But then we also have intra-school segregation, which is when you have kids of certain races that are banding together, creating cliques. Now, we're going to tackle these two separately. In terms of school segregation, how can we, you and me personally, I'm not talking about our parents, I'm not talking about our leaders. How can you and me personally, how can we fight that?
It's tough. I think one thing that individuals can do, we as individuals could do, is advocate for our public schools. If you may not want to, for valid reasons, but for people who have had public or good experiences in public schools, advocating for that is a good way to do that, whether that's at local municipal meetings or any other form online. Um, Discouraging the tendencies of affluent families to withdraw their kids from schools, whether that be by putting them in private schools or by moving to a different zone, is one way that we can stop the outflow of resources from these schools and help to improve the quality of life there and the demographic makeup of them. I think also one kind of an issue that's at the heart of this and is often overlooked is the way that public schools are funded. Do you know where funding for public schools comes from?
Income tax.
Yeah, income tax and local property taxes. So I think inevitably, as long as we continue to fund schools like that, poorer areas are going to have more highly segregated, worse schools because the property values are lower, the income is lower. These people are already at a disadvantage, and they're going to continue to be disadvantaged. So contacting your local representative to encourage them to do what they can to change that. Obviously, voting consciously, anything along that line to try to change that would be transformative. For me, maybe that means going to law school, practicing civil rights, and taking a case up to the Supreme Court to help make that illegal. For you, maybe that means helping people be aware of the fact that that's how schools are funded, because most people don't know that. So again, it comes down to either affecting direct change or providing as many people as possible with the vocabulary they need to make a collective change.
I think that one issue is that a lot of the bad actors know that's how schools are funded, and they're glad that's how schools are
Yes,
funded.
Absolutely. Because it keeps poor people poor and rich people rich. So yes, bad actors do know that, and an argument could certainly be made that it was designed for that reason. But I think if we educate the good actors, we can begin to change that.
But let's dive into the intra-school segregation. You said that in your high school experience that it was more of a melting pot.
Yeah. I'd like to expand on that too, actually. So it was definitely a melting pot for between the white students, the Asian students, and the South Asian students. I will say that the Black and Hispanic students, because they were already underrepresented at the school, just as a factor of them being from counties that could afford fewer seats, were kind of left on the margins, not included in social groups, actively or passively excluded from school activities, kind of made fun of when they tried to start their own school activities, just kind of generally looked down upon, kind of in the same way that people look down on Black students for getting into high achieving universities as a result of affirmative action. The same idea was there, that people looked at them as token or diversity students, which very understandably resulted in them kind of withdrawing from the larger social fabric of the high school, and only kind of hanging out with themselves. Because can you blame them? Why wouldn't? Yeah, they were shunned effectively from the rest of the school. So, and then despite this, my school was often touted as kind of a bastion of integration and social diversity,
Like the model.
And the model, but that ignores the fact that what few Black students there were not included in that. And that's compounded when you acknowledge the fact that my school was in a majority Black neighborhood in Richmond, a city which is itself majority Black, but kind of as a weird product of it drawing from the surrounding counties, the Black people that were present weren't included, which was unfortunate. I'm curious to hear what your experience at your high school was with that kind of thing.
So most of my friends were white. I didn't really associate much with the other black kids for the reasons that I listed earlier. My school was incredibly racist. Like I'll pull one example.
Yeah.
So we staged a walkout for the anniversary of Ferguson, where it's gonna be a silent walkout. Now most of the school participated, which was great. It was just go out to the bleachers, stand there silent. Now there were a bunch of kids who drove their pickup trucks to the football field, and they had like the giant like mega speakers, and they were playing songs from an artist called Nuck Figures.
Jesus.
Yeah,
these were students at the
students,
school.
Students during the silent walkout. So that's all you need. That's all I need to say about race
insane.
relations.
Were they disciplined for that?
Well, it was a slap on the wrist. It was actually one day ISS, not even OSS. So
that's insane.
Yeah, which is why it raises the question, how do we improve race relations inside our schools?
That's another tough question. I think and I hate to belabor this point, but I think it begins with establishing a foundational vocabulary. People are scared to talk about race. On the white side of things, it's uncomfortable to confront it, to confront the fact that as a white person, you are advantaged, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. And then on the minority side of things, it's also hard to acknowledge because it's not an intellectual exercise; it's your everyday life. And because you're at a disadvantage, you are having to work double time to keep up already. So you don't want to have to sit down and engage with someone who doesn't want to engage with you about something. And I think that's a symptom of people not having a basic shared vocabulary. So I think begins with educating everybody, and then it continues with dialogue. I think you got to be careful here. You've got to strike a balance between dialogue that is not too confrontational, but also not too comfortable. Because I think if you go the too comfortable direction, it doesn't mean anything. Think like any sort of racial diversity training you've had at a job before, where it's just like a module you click through. Well, don't be racist. Okay, yeah, I get it. Right, that's too comfortable. It doesn't do anything. And then on the other side of that, you have the kind of conversations that are too confrontational, and this hurts everybody. It can be traumatic for minority people to confront that kind of conversation, and then you're going to kind of close the ears of a lot of non-minorities when they're being finger wagged or browbeat, because it's not a good conversation. Not a conversation they want to have. So striking a balance there is how we begin to change it, and then I think part of it is a social aspect that begins early on. In high school, at least, I don't know how it was at your school, but many of the friend groups were kind of centered around an activity or a sport that people played, right? And I think as a product of the nature of elementary and middle schools, those activities were themselves quite segregated, just because poorer, more minority schools didn't have a lacrosse team, right? They didn't have a soccer team. They maybe had a basketball and football team. So, the tennis team at my school, the track and field team. Actually, the track and field team was pretty good about it, but the tennis team, the golf team, the badminton team, these are all sports that only a small cross-section of the student population got to play. And then likewise on the activity side of things, a lot of underfunded middle schools and elementary schools don't have drama programs. They don't have robotics programs. So the people who came into school interested in those activities were stepping into a space that was already segregated. No fault of their own. It just was. So I think that, bolstering the kinds and amounts of activities at all schools will result in a more diverse cross-section of populations being represented in each of those activities at the high school level, which I think will begin to start to blur the lines between segregation within schools. When people of all walks of life are engaged in the same activity, they begin to see each other more as human. Like, I imagine that those guys at the pickup trucks probably weren't involved in any sort of after-school activity with Black kids.
Mhm.
Right? They didn't see them.
Actually, ironically, a couple of them were on the football team.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That blows my mind.
But I think that's more of a culture thing at home, because if you really think about country hicks
Mhm.
who play football and who their parents are
Mhm.
and what they say at home, I think
Yeah.
that starts from earlier on.
I think you may be right. And that's a much harder problem to fix. That's a
Yeah.
generational issue.
That's something that our schools can't fix.
Not immediately. Maybe 3 or 4 generations down the line, if we start now, maybe that'll fizzle out. But I think you're right. That comes from a different place.
But even then, if you really think about this is why I actually struggle with thinking that it can be solved in 3 to 4 generations. We see this all the time, even in PA, but especially states like Florida and Texas. We'll say you teach something progressive at school, and the kid comes home.
That's true.
And they tell their parents.
Yeah, that happened.
Next thing you know.
Yeah, that happened in Virginia with Loudoun County up in Northern Virginia. Somehow it came home to the parents that their school was teaching critical race theory, which to my knowledge they weren't. It's a middle school. Like, critical race theory is a hard thing to engage with.
It's very
hard to engage with. So parents had a meltdown over this imagined idea of progressive values being taught in schools, and it like shut down the schools for a little bit. And you had parents like taking over city council meetings. So I think your point stands. That's true. And I think that kind of speaks to my point earlier about whatever method you choose, striking a balance between comfort and confrontation. And it's hard, like you said, in a country as geographically diverse as ours, because what counts as comfortable in New Hampshire is probably the most uncomfortable thing to someone in Florida. It's different. And I could chat for an hour about federalism and how that plays into this. But it speaks to the complexity of the issue, and the need for individuals who feel the capacity to begin addressing it to step up and do it. Because nothing is going to happen if we just stay the way we are. Is it going to get better immediately in 3 to 4 generations across the country? Probably not, right? Can it get a little better? Sure. Yeah. And I think that the experience of every individual student matters. So if my stepping in, if you're stepping in, if someone listening stepping in changes the experience of one student, makes their school life a little less hell, then I think that counts for something.
Now, speaking to your point of it just needing one person to make that difference, that's honestly what I think is one of the biggest factors in terms of addressing the intra-school segregation. I think that one of the most important factors in ending that is you need a strong principal or superintendent who is ready to encourage a progressive, inclusive environment. Yeah. But the problem with that is that in these schools, like for example, Methacton High School, the school that I was at, 94% white, completely affluent district. These superintendents and these principals are elected by the population.
They're elected.
That's wow. That's how it's done at some public schools.
Yeah, I wonder if
community voting.
I wonder if that's the case across all of PA. It may be.
It might be. I'm not exactly sure, but they're elected by the community. So I think that can introduce a negative feedback. Yeah, where the community ideals are just being reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. Yeah, and that's just something. That's a cycle that's going to have to be broken at some point.
Yeah, I wonder what the thinking behind that system is, because
I mean, I understand it. This school is in my community. let the community decide who runs
I
the
guess
school.
to a degree, but I think one of the benefits of a public school system is that it brings together a lot of people with ideally, right? A lot of people with different values. It takes them outside of the home where their parents may be dogmatic about one thing or another, and exposes them to new things. So I think if you have the person at the helm of that just being the guy cherry picked by the parents, you kind of like hamstring that a little bit,
I
right?
agree.
So it's interesting to me, but again, I think that parents in today's cultural climate are probably concerned about what their kids are learning at school, probably too concerned, which I think is unfortunate. So it makes sense that they'd want something like that. I just think that, like you said, really inhibits any sort of social change. You know, it's very conservative in the small c sense.
I would love to make the argument that things would get better with time, that parents are becoming more progressive, and that they're teaching their kids better things at home, and they're more receptive to their kids learning better things at school. But these last 10 years have shown us that it's actually getting worse, if anything, with critical race theory and teachings of intersectionality and things like that. We have governors who are literally outlawing these things.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading through the Virginia governor's new proposed social studies curriculum, and it like pretty much. Actually, I can't remember if this was the Florida curriculum or the Virginia curriculum now, and I want to cover my bases.
Is this the Rosa Parks one?
The one that basically excluded any mention of any civil rights activists from the social studies
definitely
curriculum.
Florida.
Yeah,
I remember I actually read the Florida textbook because this was actually insane. Rosa Parks, instead of saying that Rosa Parks stood up for the rights of African Americans to, have authority to sit where they want to sit, it said that Rosa Parks didn't want to move, and it was something like, it didn't even mention that she made a difference.
It's insane.
It's just erasing history.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. It's it is getting worse. And it's going to keep getting worse unless people do stuff about it. And I will say it's unfortunate that it's going to come down to individuals to reverse this trend and make a change, because it shouldn't be the responsibility of an individual, in my opinion. But I think, unfortunately, that's the case. And like Ron said, I think we all have a responsibility to figure out, with our set of skills, our set of capabilities, the resources to which we have access, figure out what you can do and do it. Because that's what's necessary. Yeah.
I think that was a strong point to close out on.
Yeah, I think so too.
But anyways, before we do log off, is there anything else you want to get across to our watchers and listeners?
Nothing in particular. I think anybody listening to this podcast is already taking the first correct steps. They're making themselves aware. They're making themselves aware of the people in their community who are affecting the kinds of change they want to see. And I would encourage anyone listening to follow Ron's advice. Do what you can. Doesn't mean you have to be out there leading protests or starting a new civil rights organization. Just do what you can, because the capacity of an individual cannot be overstated. And I think it often is.
Well, again, guys, this is Connor Diaz of CivWiz. We'll have the links for the app, both Apple and Android, in the description of this episode, along with websites detailing CivWiz. This is your host, Ian Kahende, and I hope you have an amazing week. Peace out, everybody.
See ya.